You know Thomas Sowell?
I know that name. Why do I know that name?
I know that you're a fan of the Thomas Sowell quote where he says there's no solutions, only trade-offs.
What's your favorite book out of the 15?
A Conflict of Visions.
Why?
It's an attempt to explain why people reach different ideological positions from one another.
What is the liberal premise?
There is nothing in human nature that would cause us to be unhappy. It's the fact that we have the wrong institution.
What is the conservative premise?
That man is flawed from day one, but that you try to get the best trade-off you can get, and that's all you can hope for.
For millions of people around the world, 2020 was the year that a veil was torn down, revealing a culture war for the soul of the West, but also revealing the extent to which unelected, nameless government elites had managed to take control. The Black Lives Matter movement sought to defund the police, tear down statues to erase history, and violently impose an agenda on the rest of society. The COVID pandemic response locked millions in their homes, closed schools, and controlled where people could go and who they could see, often for months on end. And while all this was happening, there was a movement afoot to radically change our energy systems and farming practices, whether citizens liked it or not, whether they voted for it or not. All this was being done in the name of diversity, equity, inclusion, and sustainability. 2020 made it undeniable that there was a struggle in progress for the future of democracy and freedom. But dividing the culture wars up into the ideological left and right doesn't seem very helpful anymore, if it ever was. The left-right division comes from the French Revolution, which was nearly 250 years ago now. It's time to move on. Thomas Sowell's A Conflict of Visions, Ideological Origins of Political Struggle helps us do just that. Sowell says we are caught up in a battle between at least two ways of seeing things, or two visions, the constrained vision and the unconstrained vision. At the foundation of all political visions is a view of human nature. On the one hand, we have the constrained vision. This philosophy holds that we are very limited in our capacity for altruism and rationality. Thus, there are limits to what experts can know about people and the world, no matter how well educated, and limits to what the state and its experts can engineer us to become. This view was best expressed by the political thinker and Member of Parliament, Edmund Burke, as well as within the Federalist Papers that informed the early American constitutional documents and debates.
What is government itself, but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. Politics ought to be adjusted not to human reasonings, but to human nature, of which reason is but a part.
In contrast to this vision, and emerging out of the Enlightenment with its optimistic view of human nature and rejection of the Christian doctrine of original sin, we have the unconstrained vision. This vision holds two cardinal tenets. First, that we are not born with an inclination to selfishness or sin. Second, that we can be pushed forward on the path to human perfection by a government that is commanded by experts. This view was championed by Jean-Jacques Rousseau and his Enlightenment followers, not to mention the followers of Karl Marx and Marxism up to today, if not Marx himself. These mutual visions of human nature have their own understandings of what the government is for and how much the government can accomplish. For the constrained visionaries, human nature is largely set, and no matter how much re-education and state planning is implemented, people will always display the traits of limited altruism, extending mainly to family and close friends, limited knowledge and understanding, affection for the familiar, and also biological reality. The approach of the constrained visionaries to social improvement is to first recognize that human beings are limited in their altruism and understanding, and then establish predictable laws and systems within which they can live meaningful and upright lives. Thus, an economic system that rewards talent, effort, and quality consumer goods, laws that are the same for everyone, incentives for families to stay strong and together, and education systems that honor the authority of parents over children, and the plurality of ways of seeing the world that inevitably arise in any modern society. According to those with the constrained view, the state cannot turn limited human beings into unlimited angels. Furthermore, when the state does try to re-engineer humans into something of a higher moral order than what they are capable, it cannot but become increasingly coercive and violent. For ultimately, only brute force can make a square peg fit into a round hole, and even then, only by mutilating and nearly destroying the square peg in the process. Furthermore, the constrained visionaries know that every change made will yield unintended consequences. A central concern is that there will be major social impacts of a kind completely different from the intentions, including the destruction of the rule of law in a quest for an illusory social justice. In contrast to the constrained visionaries, in the unconstrained vision, man is capable of foreseeing and controlling the social consequences of his decisions. For the unconstrained visionaries, because humans are capable of spectacular moral feats and tremendous understanding, the more expert-led government, the better. There is no limit to the extent to which our minds and behavior can improve by the right policies and education formulated by experts. So great is the faith of unconstrained visionaries in their own rationality and knowledge that they fully believe that they can plan an economy knowing what the outcomes of their engineering attempts will be. Even more than that, they believe that they sufficiently understand the workings of the global climate and can thus control it through enlightened policy and legislation that constricts what human beings can purchase, how they produce food, and what energy sources they need. Even the COVID years were a stark warning against experts who place supreme faith in themselves and the very unreliable modeling they produce to fight something as complex as a virus and its relation to a complex society. The wisdom of experts led to massive populations being locked up, schools shut for months, businesses closed or destroyed, and people dying alone. And yet much of their modeling and their directives turned out to be badly mistaken and utterly groundless. And yet millions must still live with the consequences of the supreme confidence of the expert class to understand and control society for its own good. The competition between these two understandings of human nature, the constrained and the unconstrained views, are largely what is driving our culture wars today. Sowell says, given the greater ability of individuals and social decision makers to foresee the consequences of their actions in the unconstrained vision, there is a correspondingly greater moral burden on them to exhibit social responsibility. So whereas the constrained visionaries will focus on setting procedures and incentives in place within which people can live freely and in safety to pursue their own good, unconstrained visionaries are confident enough in their own knowledge and expertise to use the government to directly impose patterns on society, like equality, for example. Equality, says Sowell, has been at the heart of the unconstrained vision. So, for example, where the constrained visionary is satisfied with a legal system that does not discriminate based on race, the unconstrained visionary will advocate a regime of affirmative action and diversity, equity, and inclusion, measures to directly bring about equality. But does it work? Or does it merely distort the workplace and society while discriminating against others based on their own race and sex? For example, the affirmative action in university admissions can lead to minority students finishing towards the bottom of the class at a top-tier university when they could have actually come near top of the class at a lower-tier university. Is that really an advantage for them?
The average black student is the top 10% nationwide in mathematics, and in the bottom 10% at MIT, and 1/4 of them don't make it. We have the kid who goes to a top-level school. He wants to be a chemist or whatever, and now he gets there and he finds he cannot learn chemistry as it's taught at that school. Does not mean he can't learn chemistry. It means that they have very high-pressure students. They can teach this stuff at a very fast rate, skipping on explanations, and these students will all pick that up as they go along. He may find that he can't keep up with that. And so in order to survive, he switches into some easy subject, which may be some ethnic studies program or what have you. And so someone who could have gotten a first-rate education at a good college ends up getting a third-rate education at a top college, or ends up flunking out altogether.
Or what about the possibility of minority students who are brought up in middle-class or wealthy households who could easily afford the fees of a university, getting preferential placement over non-minority students brought up in poverty who miss out sheerly by virtue of their skin color? Sowell points out that the unconstrained view, with its optimism of what can be accomplished, its faith in the government to drive progress, and its elevation of a need for experts who will re-engineer society via the government, appeals much more to the youth than to older citizens. Why do optimistic, expert and government-driven projects appeal to the youth more than older people? For several reasons. The young do not yet appreciate how inefficient and ineffective government departments can be, for they've not had to deal with them much. The young are too inexperienced to really appreciate the complexity and multifaceted nature of most social problems, thinking that they can be solved as opposed to just being able to live with all sorts of trade-offs to make life easier. Thus, they're more likely to have a misguided self-confidence in their ability to solve social problems. Younger citizens are also the most likely candidates to be trained and employed as the very experts who will drive the project. The young are also less attached to the prevailing institutions and practices of any society, not having lived with them for as long as older citizens. And finally, the young are, by virtue of their youth, through no fault of their own, used to a higher authority providing them with what they need, whether school or parents. And so this model of government-society relations has an intuitive appeal to them, perhaps even a comfort. It's a comforting continuation of their childhood-adolescent experience. And yet there are some interesting developments. Recent studies are showing that younger Americans are gravitating more to conservative positions in politics. In other words, the constrained vision is gaining appeal among younger voters of late. Donald Trump won the 2024 election partly because he appeared on the Joe Rogan podcast, whose audience is much younger on average than the viewers of legacy media. For the past 20 years, Western government bureaucracies, educational institutions, and increasingly corporations have been dominated by adherents to the unconstrained vision. Because of this, we've seen a rise in suffocating woke ideology in schools, workplaces, and universities. We've also been subject to top-down overhauls of our energy systems, farming industries, as well as other industries that have been costly to consumers and all premised on the belief that experts can understand and control the climate. Finally, the COVID years saw governments directed by experts with unconstrained visions locking people up, shutting down schools, and instituting therapeutic mandates over millions of citizens. Thomas Sowell's A Conflict of Visions is essential reading for anyone who wants to understand the unsettled times that we live in today. Sowell's book also helps us to work through our own positions on the most important issues today, helping us to clearly understand our own visions, ensuring that they truly help us to see the world as it is, rather than merely blinding us to reality and the dangers that go with such blindness. I'm Stephen Chavura for John Anderson Media.